everyone, it's Jay again, and I am back with another unsolved true crime case for you all today. This is case number 7. I know I just got done with the first two-parter case of the disappearance of Johnny Gosch, so if you haven't gotten the chance to watch both parts of case number 6, I definitely recommend watching that when you get the chance. That case has tormented me since I was a little kid, but for today's case, we will be talking about another unsolved murder. I will now put on my disclaimer page for everyone to be able to read now. As always, I will be talking about very dark themes. For this case, unfortunately, the main topic of discussion has to do with racism. I will be talking about things like the Ku Klux Klan, also known as the KKK. If that is something you do not want to hear about, I know it's a very dark discussion, but it's very necessary, especially for this case. If you don't want to hear about these topics, go ahead, click out now, and hopefully you guys will be back for another case. But let's go ahead and begin the unsolved murder case of O'Neal Moore. So O'Neal Moore was born on April 23rd, 1931. As far as I can tell, he seemed to have had a pretty normal childhood. Unfortunately, I'm going to be very honest, there isn't really any type of information regarding how O'Neal grew up. This case is over 50 years old at this point. It's actually almost 60 years old, so there's not a lot of information out there about his early life. I can, however, tell that he loved his mother and had always been a very honorable man his entire life. By the time he was a young adult, he had joined the Army and served his country of the United States with great passion. And again, unfortunately, I couldn't find any specifics during his time in the Army. Unfortunately, I do not have any specific story I can tell you guys about, and I am not sure how long he was active in the Army, what year he was discharged, or for what reason he was discharged, but as far as I can tell, he had been a great soldier. After his time in the Army, he quickly got married to the love of his life, Maybella Moore, in 1954. They had their first daughter, Veronica, by the time he was 25 years old. As more years passed, they actually had 3 more daughters together, Regina, Tressler, and Sharonda. Beautiful names for these beautiful girls. His wife and daughters absolutely adored O'Neal. Maybella described her husband as a big family man. She describes him as brave and passionate. She said that he would take the care to come home after a long shift to carefully not wake up any of his daughters. He would come home around 2 o'clock in the morning, so he was very quiet when he came home. He did not want to disturb any of his girls when they were sleeping. But the next morning, she would describe that all of the girls would wake up and they would immediately run and jump onto him when he was still in bed because they were just so excited that their daddy was home. She said that O'Neal would do anything and everything possible to protect his family. And at this point, it was the 1960s, a very different time for African Americans than it is today. The 1960s were the height of the civil rights movement. Segregation was beginning to deteriorate across the country, but it was still a very horrible time for the Black community. Whites and blacks would often face off in intense and often very violent confrontations. At this time, O'Neal was already known to the community of Washington Parish, Louisiana, as a very respectable Army veteran. Segregation was beginning to crumble, and communities across the country were starting to change for the better. During the 1960 and 1964 election for sheriff in Washington Parish, Sheriff Dorman Crowe was facing off the election against a candidate that the Ku Klux Klan had selected. They had selected it in order to preserve segregation in the city. But they did come up short both elections, and Sheriff Crowe succeeded. During his 1964 campaign for re-election, he had promised the community that if he were re-elected, he would hire 2 black deputies, and this was absolutely huge at this time. Washington Parish, along with pretty much all other cities, had never had African American deputies before. Sheriff Crowe, like I stated, did end up winning this second election in 1964, and he kept his word to the community. O'Neal, to everyone who knew him, felt he would be perfect for this job. Everyone knew his passion of wanting to protect and serve his community, so a lot of people asked him to apply for the job, and he did. And that is when 2 officers were hired as deputies. O'Neal Moore and David Creed Rogers, who went by Creed, were the first 2 African American deputies for Washington Parish. They had been hired for the job on June 1st, 1964. Now let's be clear, a lot of people were very ecstatic about this change, but this wasn't a time of equality bliss for the Black community. There were also a lot of people who hated O'Neal and Creed being deputies for no other reason but because they were Black men. And O'Neill and Creed weren't stupid. They were well aware that they had put themselves in danger and that they had potentially put their families in danger taking and accepting this job. Both men took precautions. They avoided civil rights activities that were frequently happening. They did not attend any marches or rallies. At this time, they only wanted to perform their duties as law enforcement deputies. O'Neill's wife Mayvella said it was a pretty scary time in their lives. There was a constant fear for them. But O'Neill was a brave and honorable man, and he wasn't afraid of the white supremacists that were in his community. He did his job as deputy, and he did it to the best of his ability, as he could as a black man during this time period. I don't understand how a person could have so much hatred against another person just because of how they look, and why they were so angry with two men who were very well respected men being deputies for their city, especially since I read that O'Neill and Creed were not even allowed to confront or arrest white people, even as deputies. They just weren't allowed to. So knowing that, and knowing that they honestly didn't have the authority over white citizens, why it was such a big deal to them. These people obviously were afraid of change, and they just had so much hatred. It's just unfortunate that people think that way. But at the end of the day, O'Neill and Creed being deputies didn't affect them. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I guess my mind isn't wired that way, and I wasn't a part of this time period, but goddamn, that just makes me absolutely sick, and it pisses me off how people could be so cruel to somebody just over something, in my opinion, so irrelevant, like the color of your skin, or your sexuality, or any other prejudice you can think of that's out there. KKK members were pissed about these changes that were being made. Less segregation, black people being hired for jobs they felt were white man's jobs. And they made it their mission to spread chaos and to spread their hate throughout the community. Most of the actions they did were violent ones. They would do bombings. They would set fires. They would beat and shoot African Americans and white activists supporting them. They did these horrifying things in secret. Many people were killed, and a lot of these deaths or assaults ended up being swept under the rug. And you see, that's the thing about the Ku Klux Klan that gave them a lot of power, was fear. Everyone was terrified of them and what they were capable of. Back then, if you had any information about the Klan, what they were doing, who was a member, you would keep your mouth shut in fear for your life and your family's life. If you saw anything that they did, you would not say anything to anyone. People were beyond scared of this group. But despite the fear of the KKK, things continue to change. More rights were continuously being gained for the black community. The Ku Klux Klan tried to prevent all these changes, but they weren't able to stop the natural order of change within a society. But this brings us to a very tragic day. It was June 2nd, 1965. O'Neill and Creed had just literally had their 1-year anniversary of becoming deputies. It was around 9 or 10 o'clock at night. O'Neill and Creed had just finished their shift, and they were on their way to O'Neill's house to eat a catfish dinner that Mayvella had prepared for them. O'Neill was the driver, and Creed was on the passenger seat. They were driving down the road and had just passed the railroad tracks on Main Street when they noticed that they passed a small fire, so O'Neill made a U-turn and backtracked to the fire's location. They were able to see that this was just a small little trash can fire, so they decided to just disregard it, let it burn, and then O'Neill made another U-turn again to continue to their path to O'Neill's house. They were only a couple of miles away from getting to his house, and that's when they noticed a 1954 Chevrolet dark pickup truck pulling out from the side of the road, and it began to follow them. O'Neill and Creed, they were used to situations like this, and they quickly expected that they were going to be harassed by the people in this truck. The truck then started to drive up right beside O'Neill's patrol car, and from within the bed of the truck, a man began to open fire on O'Neill and Creed with a rifle. As they were getting shot at, O'Neill lost control of his vehicle, and they ended up crashing into a tree. A couple more shots continued to fire after they crashed as the pickup truck sped away from the scene. And according to Creed, it was one of the last bullets that they shot that struck O'Neill in the back of the head, and it killed him instantly. O'Neill was 34 years old. When O'Neill was fatally shot, his body had slumped over top of Creed, who also suffered from gunshot injuries to his shoulder and to one of his eyes. Despite injuries, Creed was able to radio for help, and he described the truck and was able to count at least 3 people involved with this shooting. He also described the direction the truck was heading. A local neighbor heard the gunshots and was the first one to the scene. This neighbor's name was Daniel Fornia, who went by the name Scrap. Scrap was a World War II veteran, and he had actually witnessed this black truck following the patrol car. And as they went out of view, that is when he heard approximately 8 to 10 gunshots fired. And without hesitation, he ran to the site of the gunshots. When he got there, he saw that the car had crashed into the tree, and he first went to the driver's side, and he looked inside. The first thing he noticed was O'Neill's dead body slumped over. But then he heard Creed talking into his radio, so then he ran around the other side of the truck, opened the door of the patrol car, and that's when Creed actually gave Scrap his own shotgun. He hid himself behind the tree the patrol car crashed into, and Scrap stood guard the entire time until law enforcement came, just in case the truck decided to turn around and come back. Several units had showed up to the scene a few minutes later, including Chief Deputy Sheriff Doyle Holliday, and he immediately started the investigation. As Creed was being wheeled away on a gurney, he told Sheriff Holliday the description of the truck again to him, and he described this truck in such precise detail. He described the pickup truck as black with a Confederate flag on its front bumper. It had a white grille and rubber plates on the front and side rails. Holliday immediately sent out an APB for this truck. And within 30 to 45 minutes after Holliday had sent out this APB, he had received a call and was told that they had successfully stopped a truck located 20 miles away from the crime scene that perfectly fit the description. The truck had been stopped in Tylertown, Mississippi. The only part of the truck that did not fit Creed's description is that the truck did not have side rails at the time it was apprehended. The driver of the truck's name was Ernest Ray McElveen, who from this point on is going to only be referred to as ERM. So he was immediately arrested and became the prime suspect of this case. At the time of his arrest, he worked as a paper mill worker from Bogalusa, Louisiana. He was also a World War II veteran and was also known as a white supremacist. 2 pistols were found in the truck, but not the shotgun rifle used for the shooting. ERM was shortly released on a $25,000 bond, and all charges were later dismissed due to lack of evidence. Of course, suspicions of the Ku Klux Klan being involved were formed. Members were questioned about O'Neill's murder, but unshockingly, they denied any involvement the night of O'Neill's murder. Mayvella went to the emergency room where they took his body, and when she got there, he was on a gurney and his hand fell over, and she instantly knew that he was dead. And that's just so heartbreaking. I just could not imagine seeing the love of your life in that way. O'Neill was laid to rest a week after the shooting. Creed survived his injuries, but he was permanently blinded in one eye. And at the end of the day, O'Neill's murder just ended up being so completely pointless because it did not accomplish anything for the KKK. His murder did not get rid of the black deputies within the police force. It did not scare or intimidate any future African Americans from applying to these positions. In fact, another black deputy immediately took O'Neill's place after he was murdered. So if the purpose of this drive-by shooting was to kill O'Neill and Creed, to eradicate black people from being deputies, this did not work. Doyle Holliday continued his investigation for the shooting for several months. 2 weeks after the shooting, Holliday was at his home, and he had just finished a phone call with the sheriff. He then sat down on his couch, and then immediately shots were fired toward his home. He told his family to get down on the floor. He grabbed his own gun, and he ran outside the front door, and he began rapidly firing his own gun towards the people who were shooting at his home. The car with the shooters immediately took off, and as far as anyone knows, no one had gotten hurt from this shooting. If any of the perpetrators had gotten hit, no one had reported it, of course, because they didn't want to be arrested for shooting at a chief sheriff's home. So this tells me that there were a group of people that did not want Holliday to continue the investigation of O'Neill's murder. It seems like they were trying to scare him off the case by doing this shooting, which again, this was another failed attempt by these people because Holliday continued with the investigation for several more months. And if they were trying to kill him as well, that would have also been pointless because the FBI was also involved with this case at this point already. So this would not have stopped the investigation from continuing. A $25,000 reward was offered from the governor of Louisiana to anyone that could provide information regarding the shooting, but the local population refused to cooperate with the FBI and investigators, most likely due to fear. With no cooperation from the people, with no leads, and with ERM's charges being dropped due to lack of evidence, the case became inactive by the end of 1967. 20 years later, in June of 1987, the FBI field office received a call from an informant, and then they also received 2 anonymous letters that claimed to identify the 3 men that were in the truck and a part of the shooting that took the life of O'Neal. In the letters, they even described the route that the truck took during that night. Because of these new leads, the case was opened back up. The 3 men that were identified through this phone call and the 2 letters were questioned, of course. Their family members were questioned, and any other person associated with these 3 men were also questioned. But evidently, not enough evidence had come from these questionings, as no one was ever arrested. The case was opened again multiple times throughout the years. It had been opened in 2001, then again in 2007, and then most recently in 2009 it was reopened and investigated by Civil Rights Era Team, the Cold Case Initiative, and frustratingly, no results have been found or confirmed during any of these reopenings. During the 2007 reopening, they did offer $40,000 to anyone with any information leading to the indictment and arrest of anyone responsible for the shooting, but still, no one has come forward. The last update I was able to find about this case is that in 2016, the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice recommended that the case be permanently closed due to the passage of time and the fact that most witnesses and possible suspects in the case are deceased. They believe that the only information they will now be able to receive are from second or third generation witnesses who would only have, at this point, rumors, speculation, and hearsay to provide to FBI investigators. At this point, it has almost been 60 years since O'Neal Moore had been murdered, decades without really any definitive answer for his wife, children, and the rest of his family and loved ones. And it's just infuriating because if O'Neal Moore had not been a black man, or if this murder had not taken place during this period of time, I believe 100% that this case would have been solved and he would have gotten the justice that he deserves. Doyle Holliday did pass away in 1998. Creed Rogers continued his service as sheriff deputy even after the shooting that took the life of his friend and partner O'Neal. He did not let the hate or fear stop him from his duty as a deputy. In fact, I think it made him work even harder. And despite him being blinded in one eye that night, he stayed with the Department of Washington Parish, and eventually he made it as a captain before he ended up retiring in 1988. He always wanted to have the answers of who was a part of that shooting that night. And I think, in a way, he suffered from survivor's guilt. Creed never stopped thinking about that night, but sadly he never got to have any answers either, as he passed away in 2007. As for ERM, who had been the only prime suspect ever in this case, and had been one of the only 3 men allegedly a part of the shooting, he got to live his life normal. He died in 2003 at the age of 79. I did read that his obituary mentioned he was a World War II veteran. He received 2 Purple Hearts while in service, and he had retired 55 years of working for the same company. But there was no mention of his potential involvement of the shooting that occurred on June 2nd, 1965, that ended the life of O'Neal Moore, as if it had never happened. There is no doubt in my mind that this case, under different circumstances, would have been solved. O'Neal Moore was a man whose life had been cut short for no reason other than for the skin color he had been born with. He could have had a very long and happy life, but people with hearts full of hatred took his life away and permanently blinded another man in one eye. They took O'Neal from his wife and his 4 little girls, who were ages 9, 7, 3 years old, and 9 months old when their father had been murdered. The 2 oldest girls may have a few memories of O'Neal, but the 2 youngest, they don't have any memory of their father. And it's a damn shame that they had to grow up without him. And it's even more upsetting because they still haven't gotten any answers or justice for their father. I found a brief interview with one of his daughters, Trustler, and I will go ahead and play that clip now.
I have no memory of my father. He was murdered when I was 3 years old.
The murder of O'Neal Moore is of a number of unsolved civil rights cases across the country. 113 cases were freshly re-examined. Only a handful are open, with O'Neal Moore's death one of them.
All lives matter. I'm not going to be prejudiced to the fact to police officers. I respect the police officer because they are there to protect and serve us. But I've been in the Black Lives Matter line all my life. I respect his uniform, but somebody else didn't respect his color. And that's the problem.
It breaks my heart that she doesn't remember O'Neill, and I can hear the pain in her voice, how much it hurts her to not have any answers definitively of who murdered her father. There's a lot of hate in this world, and it still exists to this day. I can't imagine hate like this will ever truly be eradicated, but I pray this family gets some sort of closure. Mayvella is still holding on to hope that her husband's case will be solved one day. She is still living, from what I read, at the same house that they lived in that night of O'Neill's murder. And Mayvella and her daughters deserve to have all of the answers. So please, if anyone has any information regarding this case, please don't be afraid to speak out. It's a long shot at this point, but it's not impossible for this case to be solved. I will link the phone number you can contact if you have any information about O'Neill Moore's murder, and you can remain anonymous when contacting this number. But that is all I have for today's case. Don't forget to like, share, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. My social media links are also in the description below. But until next time, I will be back with case number 8. Until then, bye all.